Cool. Hello, Mary. Welcome to today's webinar. Feel free to drop us any questions or anything in the chat. Let us know where you're from, what company you're from. If there's any questions that you have, that would be lovely. We're going to start probably right around 1 o'clock. So we're going to hang out till other people arrive and just hang out for the time being. Yeah, this is always the fun part.
That's right. That's right. So this is where we start talking about weather, right?
Yeah. You know what? I was on one the other day, and I came in like 2 minutes of, and what was she talking about? Oh, it was actually on giving webinars, and she was actually going through a bunch of the basic advice that were in her presentation. Anyway, it was really kind of funny. It was interesting. It was really interesting. So Stuart, where are you physically?
I'm in Naperville, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago.
Yes, I know Naperville. Is it
Oh,
St.
good.
Margaret Mary Parish? St. Margaret's?
No, St. Peter's.
St. Peter's. Okay.
St. Peter's.
I think I went to a workshop in that parish a lot. I mean, I lived there 23 years ago, so yeah, but that's kind of my home.
Beautiful church.
Yeah. Well, Naperville, little like suburban commuter suburb, is no longer really a suburb.
It is a hyper commuter suburb. We have 2 train stations, and we're actually the busiest. I think it's in all of Metro. It's the 2 busiest train stations.
Wow.
Yeah, which means I don't commute into the city anymore, but we used to have lots of express trains. So that was always nice because we were towards the end of the line. So those express trains always were very useful. So
yeah, in the early 80s, I worked downtown at an ad agency, and the vice president that was above my whole division, he lived in Cary, you know, which at the time was like a 2-hour driver commute, and everyone left but he loved living there because he lived like on a farm basically.
Yep.
And I remember one of the times I went back more recently, and I was like, oh my God, everything between Chicago and Cary is completely built up now.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It's not, there's no like, it's not in the middle of the boondocks any longer. It was pretty funny.
No, it's amazing. That's amazing. And did you grow up in Chicago?
No, I moved there after college. That was, but it's one of my favorite places in the whole world.
Where did you grow up?
I would move back there in a minute.
Did you go to DePaul?
No, I went to Notre Dame.
Notre Dame. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I didn't go to school in the city. But I moved there because I was a theater and theology major.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it's really interesting. South Bend is, and I didn't realize this until my son played travel baseball and we started playing tournaments down there. But South Bend kind of considers itself to sort of be a very far off suburb of Chicago. It's not, it's not that far when you think of the time that it takes from other areas on our way into town. So
yeah, it's true. My godson's family, my best friend, her youngest son, and they have two homes, one in Chicago and one in South Bend. She used to be a professor at Notre Dame, and the husband has a job in the city, and they would commute between the two, and you know, and now he works part-time, teleworks in South Bend, and then lives and works in Chicago for a few days a week. So yeah, it is. He's like, oh yeah, I'll get work done on the train. It's a 2-hour train, but it's like, yeah, I'll get work done on the train. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, it is productive time if you can use it. You know, the funny thing is it's also napping time, and after you ride the train enough, your body knows when to wake yourself up for your stop. I never missed my stop. You just you can sense it. It's kind of like the commuter's biological clock. But you know, I grew up in Kentucky in a small town though, so I went from taking 5 minutes to get anywhere to pretty much taking an hour to to get anywhere up here.
Yeah, it's definitely a big city, East Coast kind of thing. Yeah, I totally get it. When I moved here, I was trying to describe to people how big Chicago is, because people looked at me and they say, "Oh, aren't you excited about moving to the big city?" I'm like, I just moved from Chicago. It is a big city, and I lived in the city for most of the time I lived there. And it took me about a year to figure it out. And the way I started describing it was, it takes the same amount of time to drive from Baltimore to Washington round trip as it does to drive from the northernmost part of the city to the southernmost part of the city. And that's the
Yeah,
first time people got it. Yeah, it's different. Hey, hey,
it
Jim,
is.
Lisa, Michelle, good to see you guys. Different parts of the country represented. We've got some more attendees. So,
What?
and speaking of big city, we are like, Stuart, you and I are in a totally different experience than some of the people who are already online with us. In fact, I'm going to unmute everybody's microphones if you'd like to join in conversation as we're getting ready. Got about it. I'm going to do that. I was going to do that. Let's see. Oh, I can't. Let's see. Oh, I see how you do it. Okay. And I should probably get rid of all of my, there you go. And okay, so we have more people arriving, slowly but surely. So Stuart, it's 1 o'clock on my clock. I've got a clock over here that I'm using for timing. So let's give ourselves a minute or so, maybe another minute. We've got we have about 34 people registered. So, oh, what did I do? I keep changing my screen. It's pretty funny. Uh-oh. Okay. Stuart? Ah. Can you say something again?
Absolutely.
Okay.
All
I
right.
clicked something and did something weird, so.
No worries. No worries. I was saying I was excited. This is like it's like a Catholic homecoming for me. I will explain
So,
why.
okay. I have 102. Why don't we get started with at least some of the basic setup things, and then we can go from there.
Sounds good.
Good afternoon, good morning, everybody, depending upon where you're calling in from. We do have people from East Coast to West Coast, so we are somewhere between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. Time. If you have any problems hearing or seeing, please feel free to use the question or the chat function on your screen, and I will see that and try to address as much as possible. Today, we are going to embark on the first of what I'm affectionately calling the Catholic Summer School. It's our webinar is entitled The Evolution of Work in Disruptive Times, and the subtitle being How to Take the COVID-19 Disruption and Turn It into Productive Work, which I'm sure many of us have been trying to figure out. Just instead of that, think about it, design it, and then act. We're all acting and then thinking about it afterwards. But as I said, this is the first session in our Catholic Summer School session. And largely what that means is we canceled the membership meeting, which would have taken place 2 weeks from this week because of the stay-at-home orders, especially in Illinois, which now go through the 31st of May. And so we replaced it with just a series of webinars rather than like a full day from top to bottom, since I know, let me put it this way. I have a hard time sitting through a full day of webinars. I don't know about you, but it's much easier to do these one at a time. So that's what we're doing. And the rest of the sessions begin the week of June 8th. If you have not registered for any of those, please feel free to go to the ACP website and go down to the calendar and you can find those there. Let's see. The second thing too, if you have not, if you did not see it in the announcement in the email newsletter that came out on Sunday, we've also added some peer group meetings starting the week. I'm sorry, the sessions start the week of June 1st. The peer groups start the week of June 8th. I apologize. I'm kind of new to facilitating things, so bear with me. The peer groups are scheduled one a day, Tuesday through Friday, for the week of the 8th and then the 15th. For various, there's 7 peer groups, I believe. Please feel free to sign up for whichever ones are appropriate to you in the work that you do. You're not limited. Everybody is muted except for me and...
I can't hear you.
Oh, who? Lisa? You can't hear me? Stuart, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Might be her output setting. Maybe her output setting's not set right, or I don't know.
Huh.
Maybe do a
Yeah.
chat.
I can't hear.
Anyone else can't hear us?
Can you try your audio? Lisa, can you hear Stuart? Stuart, can you say something, please?
Yes, absolutely. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the evolution of work in disruptive times.
Okay. Might want to try coming back in. See if that that helps. I do see. Okay, thanks, Jim, for letting us know that. I'm gonna go quickly then. Chatter questions. Stuart, I'm just gonna jump to the intro so Stuart can talk. Stuart Merritt is our presenter today. He is the founder and storyteller at Social Frequency Media and the founder of the Art Scores Project. I'm going to let him tell you anything more about himself. If there are any other questions besides those about audio, then I'm going to let him go ahead and see if I can figure out what to do while he's speaking. All right, everybody? Stuart, go ahead.
Working with you and planning this, and it's certainly great to have you leading this organization, without a doubt. It's truly an honor to present to everyone today and to share in these stories. We're going to be talking a lot about disruption, and as the title suggests, a lot of it's going to be about the evolution of work. But as we were preparing for this session, we got some additional questions that really speaks to the other side of my life, other than being a virtual and flexible work advocate, is the creative side of how disruption is impacting our brands and our products in the digital age. So I've added on a little bit to talk about that. I want to apologize in advance if I seem a little spaced out at any point in time. My wife is actually recovering from COVID, and the symptoms have been flirting with me for days, but I'm feeling pretty strong today. So we will move through it. Just a quick story about myself. I was joking earlier, this feels like a Catholic homecoming to me. I think my mom is smiling down from heaven upon me. She was a devoted religious educator. I did go to Catholic school for 6 years, as did my older brother and sister, but I actually got off lucky because my older brother and sister had nuns for teachers, and by the time I arrived, it was civilian teachers only. So I had that going for me, and they would tell me the tales of the nun teachers. But just to kind of set the stage for what we're talking about, and really speaking to something that some of the questions that came in. My 6th grade year, our principal every day would come in with the goal of us getting all the way through the Old Testament in the afternoon. It was always from 2 o'clock to 2:30 in the afternoon. I remember it well. So he would just come in, and we started from the very beginning, and he would read for half an hour. And as you might imagine, with 6th graders, holding their attention was something that he knew was going to be a challenge. So I look at it, and he would walk around the room. He would just do strange things to get people's attention because we never knew what he was going to do next. And then he would continue to read, and then quietly he'd put the podium on the teacher's desk, and he'd move the chair, and then he'd stand up, and then he would read from the podium on top of the teacher's desk from times. And it worked because we paid very, very close attention to it the entire time. Maybe it's not so different from the challenges that you all are facing today in the Catholic publishing industry from that standpoint. And maybe there's a lesson to learn from there as we move through, but we're going to explore it more. So I said 30 minutes here. We're actually going to be almost an hour. I want to leave plenty of time for questions to get through the evolution of work. My goal really in this time is to flip as many light switches as I can. To really take away from this, maybe not just actionable information, which I will be sharing, but also to take with you maybe some shifts in your thought process, some shifts in your outlook and perspective. When we hear the word disruption, it seems like something that's very, very scary, something that we've got to batten down the hatches and ride out the storm. But the reality, what's most exciting about disruption is the opportunities that it's creating. And the opportunities from a flexible virtual work standpoint that have been created because of this pandemic that we're all spending a lot of time doing and talking about these days. So we're going to talk about that. And as I mentioned, I'm going to integrate some of the questions that we received throughout the presentation as we move through. So real quickly, why me? Who am I? What am I all about? Why am I here talking about flexible work and storytelling and all of those good things? Well, in 2009, my flexible work evolution began, and I've spent the last 11 years as a human flexible work experiment, turning my approach inside out. But to truly understand what it's all about, we need to go back to when I was a kid. I was a budding documentarian with a tape recorder, loved to capture family life, loved the family stories. Just devoted to story. It was one of my great passions in life. And if you look closely at that picture, that KISS shirt I have on was actually a first communion gift. So that is a kind of a fun anecdote to that picture, which I use in other presentations, but I think I think you all will get a little more humor out of that. And then in this second photo, my godmother and godfather loaned us this piano when I was a kid, and it ignited a deep, inexhaustible passion for music. And I began composing music at age 11. But along the way, leading up to my career, I ended up in the association world, working in associations just like Therese, just like this Publishers Association. Having begun my work life in politics and having left with my idealism intact, I found the association world, and it was a place that I knew that I could make a difference in the world each and every day. I spent 5 years with the American Bar Association and 3 years with the Emergency Nurses Association. But then I was posed with the dilemma. Here I was, an association nerd, but also getting deeper into documentary filmmaking, food photography. I come from a restaurant family, lifelong support of independent restaurants. I wanted to do more to help them succeed. And then there was the music composing side of my life that I didn't really have a whole lot of time from when I was working full time. So basically, I decided to invent my own job, which became Social Frequency, taking the things that I do really, really well and forgiving myself for the things I don't do well and doubling down on those things that I do well, which really revolved around storytelling and its many facets and creative work. I'm a huge believer in flexible work, mainly because I'm devoted to the notion that human potential is our most precious natural resource. And there's amazing things that we can all do to contribute to our world, given just a little bit of extra time and freedom that we don't often enjoy working full-time jobs, commuting long hours, and spending most of our days and productive life inside of an office space. So it's about creating the best of all worlds to be able to do the work that we need to do, but to also do the work that really moves our soul. So Social Frequency was created, and for the past 11 years, I've done work for over 50 associations and nonprofit organizations, staying really focused on the nonprofit world. And I do a lot of podcast production, development, business documentaries, historical, and then I do my own projects as well, including the Art Scores project, which Therese had mentioned in there. So really finding a way to do all the things that I'm passionate about is really what it was all about. And I think that's really what the rise of flexible work, in addition to the technology that has finally enabled it, is all about. So from that standpoint, it's just not all about inventing my own job. During the past 11 years, I actually also served 3 years as CEO of a national association called the National Barbecue and Grilling Association. And why that's important for our conversation is I actually took that association and made them 100% virtual. We went from bricks and mortar to a fully virtual organizational model. And I served as the CEO for 3 years. I hired a team of freelancers. We virtualized as much as we possibly could in creating opportunities to connect and interact and find ways to do all the great things that we do when we get together in person, but to do it virtually. And it really made a huge, powerful difference with NBBQA. And I guess it kind of gives me a little bit of street cred to talk about what I'm talking about, because it's not just my personal experience, it's not just the theoretical, it's also the very practical, hands-on at the reins of an organization, leading them through this back in 2015 is when I started. So that's a great case study in and of itself, is that there's a virtual tool to do just about everything you might imagine, and it can certainly be scaled. So our first question, what is this new world of work and why is it changing? And to begin, we'll look at shifting our organizational culture toward the new world of work, which is important. And I like to use this next image because if you look past the notion of war and the principle of what the strategy is, there's a lot that we can learn from antiquated warfare. I'm not a violent person. I'm not advocating war, but the notion is when armies used to battle each other back during these times, they would line up against each other and they would fire at each other, and the second line would come in and fire. And the reason was very practical, because the best technology they had in their weapons was to single shot, single load. And then they stood up sort of there in clear day and left themselves vulnerable to it. Turn time to the rise of modern warfare, which the strategy really became more strategic, about being more flexible, being more agile, being more efficient, being more, as we said, strategic. Someone finally got tired of getting shot at, I think ran and hid behind a hickory tree and just decided that they were going to come up with their own approach to this. But the reality is traditional work still looks a bit like antiquated warfare. It's very costly. It's fairly rigid. It clings to traditional approaches and values, still believing there's such thing as employment security. It's an interesting story. Years ago when I was in college, I did a Leadership Institute program representing my university at Princeton University. I went to the University of Kentucky, but it basically paired together CEOs with students to sort of engage in sort of this mind share about what the future is going to bring. And that in the early 90s is when I first learned a senior vice president of a major financial company explained the difference between employment security and employability. And at that time, in the 80s, it had already began to transfer from, we're no longer company people. It used to be you worked for your entire career for one organization. That was kind of the illusion of the company person. But what that CEO or that senior vice president had said, and really changed my whole outlook on things, is the corporate world had shifted to a model of employability because they'd already started to become more agile in their approach to talent and talent management. And basically what that meant was, we're not going to be able to guarantee that you're going to have employment security at our company for the rest of your life until you retire and take a pension. But what we can promise you is that we're going to give you the opportunities to be employable, to develop skills, to demonstrate proficiency, and then you will be able to move on and be more competitive somewhere else. So that honestly has been the reality for a long time, but our own approach to our careers and jobs has been that coveted full-time job, thinking that there's somehow a lot of employment security in that. And I think we're learning right now there's not a lot of employment security around. There's no industry that is immune to what's happening. And even in the healthcare world, even nurses, our frontline heroes, many specialties are getting furloughed. because they work in different areas. So when we begin from the standpoint that we trust in our job because we think it's got employment security, and then we realize that it doesn't, then it begins to rethink, well, then what more can I do to not only manage my career, but as leaders of organizations, what more can we do to be successful in the way we organize our workforce, our work resources, and move forward. So along 1976, this is the Apple I. It's not the very first personal computer, but it certainly is one of the first personal computers. It really set in motion a gateway toward our future of work. Soon computers started popping up on the desktops of everybody's desk, and the internet came along. But it's interesting, at a certain point, we stopped flowing with technological innovation in terms of what the capabilities of technology are within the context of work and our workforce. Because when we think about virtual work, it's the ability to do it has been with us for years now. My first exposure to something I'm going to talk about soon was 10 years ago, when I was helping another organization get off the ground, and I'll go into that a little more detailed. But we kind of put the brakes on with letting technology carry us toward a more agile future, of flexible work, and the ability of human beings to kind of work from wherever they wanted to work. And it's because there's these traditional rules that we have in our mind, that sort of held us back, and we're going to explore that a little bit. But soon we will address one very powerful truth that I think, if it's the only thing that you take away from this presentation, will be the one thing that sort of shifts your mind frame. And we'll get to that just momentarily. But to begin our look into this, I like to use this example because we all understand personal finance. We all understand that the number one rule is diversification. In terms of putting away money for retirement, it's the most basic of all universally recognized approaches to our financial security. And what is diversification? Well, thanks to Investopedia here, we have a definition that diversification aims to maximize returns by investing in different areas that would each react differently to the same event. Most investment professionals agree that although it does not guarantee against loss, diversification is the most important component of reaching long-range financial goals while minimizing risk. So that's common knowledge. We all do it. It's all built into our 401ks. It's all built into our IRAs. It's all built into how we approach the investing world. It shifts and changes as we get older. That's been embedded. But the other greatest area of risk is how we make that money. And what does our work and career portfolio look like? Well, the reality is, whether it's your organization that you're running, or whether it's your job, the future work has a lot to do with personal investment diversification, because we go all in with our team and we go all in with our job. And I've worked on both sides of the fence, and I know how incredibly difficult it is to get the right balanced workforce. I know how incredibly difficult it is when you have someone who is not well suited for a position, and they're miserable and the organization's suffering, and it's a very long process to figure a way to where you can part in a way that it's going to benefit both lives. I've been there. I've been the subject of that. But then even more so, our jobs, and not blindly thinking that this job that we have today is the one we'll always have, and that we can gain greater security by taking a more diversified approach. So the question for everybody is, what is your diversified approach to your workforce? And then what is your diversified approach to your career? And if you don't know what the answer might be, that is perfectly fine, because we're going to sort of explore what that looks like. So we were moving along in this traditional world of work. Evolution of flexible work has been very slow until the arrival of our little COVID virus here, which has turned our world upside down overnight, forcing us to rapidly evolve into an uncertain new world. And of all the images I could have chosen, this one is from Deloitte, which is a consulting firm. I really like this one because not only do you see the virus, but you see the ripples that it's causing. And it would be easy to look at this image and say, those are shock waves that are being sent throughout the world, throughout the economy, affecting health and livelihood. But when I look at this image, I see positive waves of change that it's igniting and accelerating, which is, to me, with every great setback comes opportunity. And I tend to be one of those people that is looking for the opportunity as we weather through the challenge. And that's where we're at. So the truth is, the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the evolution of work towards its inevitable and productive future. And I'm bold enough to say that for the experience that I've had, for what it's meant to the organization I ran, where we were able to do so much more with so much less, saving in cost, working with passionate talent, passionate professionals to deliver upon our mission. And the reality is, it's increasingly difficult to ignore. And because of what's happened over the last 2 months, we already are starting to see some data that we're going to look at shortly about the impact that this forced flexible work, this forced virtual work world has had on those who are able to go to offices. Now, granted, there's lots of industries that you have to report to work, but for our purposes here, I think we were all talking about those of us that would get up and go to an office each day. So what does flexible work really mean? And I'm so devoted to these webinars. As early as a couple of hours ago this morning, I was reading through my news feed, and there was this very interesting article in the Atlantic publication. And the headline grabbed me right away because it said, "Never go back to the office." And it was fascinating because it really raised the question of looking at all the things that are going to need to happen to reopen offices, and what the workspaces will need to look like, and what the procedures will be, and all the things that we'll need to do. And it kind of countered by, or just to continue to do what we've now learned we can do by working from home. So it's kind of the case was made is the cost benefit analysis of trying to get back to the old fashioned way of working in offices worth or is the benefit of it worth the cost of it? And should we not just be thinking about making a full shift to flexible work since we are already here? So I think it's interesting questions to be addressed, what ultimately that will look like. But here's a list of specialized skills that we need to be successful in our organizations, and how we will blend our team composition to really best suit those needs. We began at a place, here's what you need to be most productive and meet or exceed our expectations. That's the old-fashioned world. And it was kind of a master and servant relationship. And as employees, we always try to put our best foot forward. We never divulge our weaknesses. We secretly, engage in office politics quietly, but never to anyone, in front of anyone. But we're shifting to, as I said, here's the collection of specialized skills that we need to be successful. This is how we need to blend our team composition to best suit our needs. And that is going to include full-time employees. Full-time employment will never be out of style, but it will not be the one dominant thing as we move forward in the evolution of work. We're going to have part-timers, folks that they don't want to leave the workforce, but they don't want to work full-time. And there's going to be resources within your organizations that you don't want to lose, and you'll be willing to hold on to them for part-time if you can work out a flexible arrangement in order to do that. Then you're going to have consultants. We've always had consultants, but then you're going to have freelancers. For all intents and purposes, I've been freelancing for the last 11 years, and I believe very deeply in what freelancing can bring to your life. There's so much I've been able to do that I never would have been able to done previous to had I not had this opportunity starting 11 years ago when I walked away from a big management role in a national organization to do this. And then there's going to be virtual work options designed to optimize staff productivity and access hard to reach talent pools. So within all of these groups of workers, there's going to be increasingly the opportunity to really work from wherever you are. And when we begin to choose where we can live, there's amazing things that happen. Kind of as an aside, I do some consulting with small towns in America about economic development. And it used to be economic development was all about bringing companies in. but with the rise of the evolution of work and flexible work, is I've got some of them actually looking at how do we recruit talented professionals that can now live wherever they want because they can work from wherever they live, which opens up an entirely different dynamic that we hadn't considered in the context of that, but it's real and it's happening. And then finally, within this overall flexible work arrangement, is hopefully never having to put other duties as assigned in a job description ever again, because that does something very damaging. We all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. We're all really good at doing certain things and not so good at doing other things. And the thought that we can turn our weaknesses into our strengths is an absolute illusion. Our weaknesses are what they are because of our strengths, and our strengths are what they are because of our weaknesses. So when we're looking at full-time employment, is that I'd rather have people doubling down on their strengths rather than doing what they're good at for 40 to 60% of their work time, and then we have to backfill the other time because they're there and it's an 8-hour workday, right? Because they have to work out their 40 to 60 hours a week. And that's another interesting thing that we're going to look at down the road here. I hope I didn't take that. Actually, I did take that slide out, but I'll talk about it here. And that is the notion of the 8-hour workday. And I wish we were together because then I could ask you if anyone knows why we have an 8-hour workday. Many might believe that it has been scientifically proven somewhere along the way that 8 hours is the peak amount of productivity that we have in a given day to get the work done. Well, in truth, there's been lots of studies done. The most recent I looked at was from Ohio University, that we are actually productive for only 2 hours and 53 minutes on the average per day. So the arrangement, the situation that we're in makes a huge difference, even though we work for 8 hours. Now, where 8 hours came from actually dates back to the Industrial Revolution, when society decided that it was cruel that people had to work 10 to 16-hour shifts in the factories because they were working on a 24/7 schedule, and decided that I envision it almost as some kind of propaganda campaign, but it's like the rule became 8 hours of work, 8 hours of recreation, and 8 hours of rest. So they divided the 24-hour period by 3 and decided that 8 hours was the length of the workday. And astonishingly, we're now in our 4th industrial revolution, which is the age of disruption, yet we still cling to 8 hours. And that's another clue into the big epiphany moment that I'm going to talk about here shortly, that I think is going to flip that switch that changes over. But, you know, when we look at team culture, a lot of people think that if our team's not in place, then we won't be able to connect. But the reality is, you know, so many bad things happen too when workers get together. I've dealt with office politics as a manager, as a director, as a C-level executive in organizations. And I think getting people to stay focused on the work that they need to get done and getting it done and moving on is really what work is about. You know, having clear goals, having the freedom and the autonomy to get that work done, absent of fear. And let's face it, we live in a state of fear as full-time employees because we know that we could be let go at any moment in time. That's a very uncomfortable thing to feel. Now that I'm 11 years away from that, having had a diverse portfolio of work for 11 years, it just seems to me so difficult to think back to those times. So I want to approach one of the questions. How do we go from a quick solution to a high-performing long-term solution? So we're here in the pandemic times, and our short-term strategy is everyone's kind of working from home. You know, we're having this webinar today. We're connecting like this. Where a lot of people are using Zoom. And all of that. But the long-term solution to all of this looks a little bit like this. And I guess it's kind of cruel because it's around lunchtime for most to show a pie here. But I wanted to use it because it got back to, you know, our diversification pie. And looking at this pie, what you see here is a bunch of different specialized pieces of pie, but they're all still part of the same pie. And they all have a visible space inside that pie. Think of that in terms of full-time employees, part-timers, site-based, virtual, freelance specialists, who are all as part of the team and need to be included as part of the team. we kind of went to this point where if you're not working site-based and you're working virtually, and I have experienced it a little bit, is that if you're out of sight, you're out of mind. But that's not a dilemma of the approach to work. That's a dilemma of leadership and management. And we all have to show that every member of our team, whether they are on site or off site, whether they are full-time or freelance, they're all a vital piece of this pie in order for us to succeed in our mission and what we're doing. And this is also how professionals will begin to look at career flexibility and diversifying their own freedom and destiny, especially the incoming generations. The millennials are here, Gen Z's coming in here. They already do not understand. They're very entrepreneurial. They do not understand the traditional mode of work. But they do certainly understand technology, that's for sure. So whether we change it as leaders and managers within our organizations, it may be led by revolt at a certain point as the new generations get more deeply entrenched into the workspace. So we've been here long enough to know, what has the pandemic impact been on worker productivity? Thanks to LinkedIn, there was a really good survey that has been done recently to show sort of, this is our kind of report card on where we're at for our office-based workforce that has been working at home for some time now. 54% of respondents say working from home has actually had a positive impact on their productivity. Well, why has it had a positive impact? Well, of those 54%, 71% said it was the time saved from commuting. I was commuting almost 2 hours a day when I started, working freelance from home, and it's amazing the literal weeks and months of time that it has saved and continues to save just from not having to do that. 61% said fewer distractions from coworkers, and there is definitely merit to building a work culture where there's a team and everyone knows each other, and that's all good. But there is also the darker side of coworkers, and because I did it myself, as soon as I would start getting tired and burned out, I would roam the halls and find a conversation, drop into offices, and not get a lot of work done during that time. But 39% said fewer meetings. And this one's really important, because when we start to look at the tools shortly about how do we facilitate the technology to create a truly virtual office space, part of it is technology that means we have to have fewer meetings. And that's pretty exciting and pretty important, because then if you look at 2 hours and 53 minutes of productive work time a day, it's about refunding and making more of that time available to get the work done, to achieve our goals, than it is to talk about the work. And that's something very, very pivotal. So our next question is how to utilize technology to improve workflow efficiency, communication, and management via virtual work collaboration, which is where we just came from in talking about how do we do this on a long-term basis. And the good news is it's mostly out there already. It's been there for over a decade, and it's getting better every single day. So is there a platforms that work best for meetings and collaboration? And I would like to approach this by sharing, I think, a very refreshing picture at this point in the webinar, just to sort of get the creative juices flowing and sort of return everyone to the webinar. But this is Trento, Italy. It's ridiculously beautiful there. 10 years ago, I was hired to help get a pan-European alliance organization for innovation off the ground, basically to build it from scratch. And my role was to organize the strategy and efforts of a team of 12 from 10 different countries, starting by working virtually from the US and then for a period of time in Italy. But that was a very big challenge. And it's funny, the reason they hired an American to do this is because I was neutral. Because if anyone knows anything about the European Union and the countries, first of all, there's a reason there was 12 different team members from 12 different countries, and then they had me that didn't have anyone in the fight in terms of out there to sort of be to facilitate it all. So the one thing that I learned that saved my life was a piece of open source software called Redmine. And basically what Redmine was, it took project management, it took email communication, it took accountability tracking, it took team structuring, and folded it all into a single application. And suddenly, rather than traveling and walking around to everyone and meeting and coming together as meetings, it was one, I could sit in front of my computer and sort of manage it all. We still had meetings, but we didn't have as many meetings as we needed to, because basically within this platform, we were able to identify, here is all of the tasks that need to be achieved. Here is the steps that need to be taken in order to achieve them. Here is who is responsible for this. We are email communicating that's tied into these threads that we've created. And it really made a huge difference, because my team could then focus on actually getting the work done. And that organization's grown and blossomed. They have over 100 organizational members today of that. And it really was an important opportunity, because the answer to the question is, Redmine evolved into these different platforms. Basecamp is the one I still use every single day religiously. As a matter of fact, I was working from Basecamp as I was putting my presentation together with my notes between myself and Therese over time. But there's other platforms. Asana I've worked with. And then there's Trello, Airtable, and Monday.com. They all kind of do the same things. They all work from the same logic. But just to show you what do they do, it really forces us to document extensively our tasks, the work that needs to be done, so that it's very exceedingly clear. A lot of times productivity is lost and mistakes are made when we're not real clear on exactly what it is that needs to be done. It also enables us to assign those tasks. It enables us to establish deadlines. It facilitates our communication about tasks and updates and discussions that need to happen. There's document management within there when we need to share documents. It's, Basecamp in particular is a checklist, which I like a lot. There's something powerful about clicking that check button and seeing items disappear. I think it's a psychological reward in working. There was a book that I highly recommend called The Checklist Manifesto. It was actually written, I believe, by a brain surgeon. But it's the notion of, despite the complexity of how we organize work, oftentimes it gets back just to having a simple checklist that everyone can see and work from. And that's why I like Basecamp versus Asana. I haven't tried Trello, Airtable, or Monday.com, but it's that checklist approach to it. And then it centralizes everything into well-organized threads. So each task has a communication thread, and within that communication thread, it's chronological. So, we race around and we spend a lot of time looking for emails and piecing together email chains and trying to find that. Well, this keeps it all in one place. There's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide. And it's been amazing to me over the years that it's also sort of solved disagreements, because something happened bad. Person A didn't do what they were supposed to do. Person A said that they didn't know that they were supposed to do it. Well, lo and behold, we go back in the Basecamp thread, and there it was, acknowledged that that's what was supposed to be done. And I like to use that example because it kind of takes the gray area out of a lot of things, not just because it enables you to watchdog like you've never watchdog before as a manager in there. But then when you piece together these platforms, whichever one's going to work best for you, with your favorite video conferencing platform, Zoom, GoToMeeting, Skype, then you basically created a virtualized office space. And beyond that, there's lots of, you can set up an entire phone system via a virtual phone system. That's what we did for NBBQA. And then for the cloud, it's also, that's why I put Office 365 up here. Office 365, everything's up in the cloud. Your applications are in the cloud. The notion of having to have on-site hard drives for things has become somewhat of an obsolete approach to the world. And we see the cloud integrating itself as a default into everything that we're doing nowadays, which is very exciting to me. I know I'm a Mac user, and the Apple Cloud, basically, when I start to run out of space in my hard drive, it goes ahead and archives to the cloud automatically. I don't even have to do it, so that I'm never out of space on my hard drive. And then if I need to, after a while, if I need that document again, I just quickly click on it, it downloads it back from the cloud. Those are very powerful advances in technology. So then let's talk about the human element. What are the best ways to keep teams motivated when all or some are working remotely? And I kind of alluded to this a short time ago, and a lot of it comes down to our leadership and how we approach it. So here's the big switch flipping moment, and I wish I had a drum roll effect to do this, but it ultimately comes down to managing outcomes and not hours. We obsess ourselves as managers with making sure that our workers are always working and the hours that they're paid to work. And then we get into situations where employee A says, well, employee B is not working 8 hours a day. They've got a newborn baby. There's no possible way that person could be working all day. Then that creates a problem. Then it threatens virtual work and people are upset about it. And then it just becomes, it just into a big ball. But outcomes basically say if you get the work done, that's all you need to do. It switches that mind frame, because freedom and autonomy actually optimizes human productivity like no other. Freedom and autonomy is knowing that someone is not looking over your shoulder and that you can have the freedom to enjoy your work and get it done. Freedom and autonomy is, as an employee, knowing my responsibilities, my expected outcomes, and being held accountable for completion on schedule. Now, this also goes back to management, because meticulous documentation of what is expected and what needs to be done within your base camps or your saunas or your other work collaboration platforms is important, because I will admit, as a manager, I would get lazy sometimes in keeping track of what's going on, especially if you have a big team of people. It's a very hard thing to do. But that's the investment and the promise and the accountability that we have as managers to our team by doing the front end work to get the work set up so that they can then do what they do best and get it done, and we don't have to watch the clock. As from a freelancing standpoint, I love the IRS definition of independent contractor, because maybe it's something we should adopt for all employees. So basically, without getting into the legalese, what the IRS code for independent contractor says is you basically tell me what I need to accomplish, and then you get out of the way and let me do whatever it is I need to do to complete this work on time. And if I miss a deadline, then you're going to know it, and then we're going to have to talk about it. If I need further clarification, then I will follow up and I will ask about it. So as you start to think through this, you start to see where the need for meetings declines somewhat, because the meetings are being achieved through the platforms themselves. So then I was to say, ask yourself this question: are you enabling or disabling success within your organization? As an enabler of success, you're offering freedom and autonomy. In disabling success, it would be the same old command and control, clock watching approach to things. And that's another important thing: control. We don't have control over human beings. Control is an absolute illusion. And as savvy workers who like to keep our jobs, we do all kinds of things to make you think that this is a master-servant relationship. But I think the faster we get more honest about human behavior and our approach to management, our approach to work, the better off we're going to be. So how to leverage the rise of flexible work and the flexible workforce. The biggest thing is to adopt a freelancer mindset. And that might not be surprising after listening to the things that I have said, but freelancer mindset is a flexible mindset because our portfolio is diversified. We manage with a flexible mindset in terms of everything that we do as freelancers. We facilitate success with a flexible mindset. And it's important at the end of the day to understand it is not many people's dream to spend 40 to 60 hours a week in an office anyway, no matter how exciting the staff events are, how good the cupcakes are, how much we love the Hawaiian shirts. My personal favorite was we actually did a management dunking tank with one of the organizations that I was a manager in, where everyone got a chance to dunk their manager. It's kind of funny though when I think about it. And that water was very cold because they were just coming out of a water hose. So what I want to do now is shift. We've talked about the evolution of work. I hope now it's sort of illuminated some things. We've got about 12 minutes left. And so I really want to go into some of the questions that you all shared in advance and shift to the other side of my life, which is actually being a creative person and not just being a storyteller, but also being a business strategist. is a big part of what I do. I love strategy because it is a creative act. And I work with a lot of organizations, helping them develop story-driven brand cultures. And that's really important because when we think stories, we just think, oh, well, that's just marketing and advertising. Well, stories are at the core of our businesses, and each of your companies has a story that should be the driving force in everything that you all do. But when you look at it, I'm going to focus on my religious and spiritual life a little bit. Religion is the ultimate story-driven culture. Think about it, specifically from the Catholic Church standpoint. We have our readings, we have the gospel, we have the homily, we have prayers, we have hymns, we have communion, we have sacraments, we have Advent, we have Lent. Even ordinary time is full of stories, and that guides us along. Here the notion shepherds us along as Catholics in exercising our faith. And I would argue, having experienced a number of different churches in my life, it's amazing how specifically the Catholic Church still is very geared towards this sort of one-to-many connection. I always, my thought of Catholic worship is it's very personal, because even though you're in a congregation within your parish, it's still very personal between the Mass taking place on the altar and being within the pews within the church. I think that's something that is interesting. So the notion of religion and story-driven culture is we all exist to make us feel one with the Father, one with the Son, and one with the Holy Spirit. And that's in the absence of physical presence. Consubstantiation and transubstantiation in communion. It's all about evoking a presence where a physical presence does not necessarily exist. So when I look at the question, technology is a necessary means of religious education, but it's an insufficient means of communion, I would argue that the whole notion of Catholic faith is rooted in the communion of people around something that we cannot physically see in so many ways. So when you transpose that to religious education and religious publications and that business, then there's the opportunity. Spiritual presence in its many forms is a sufficient means of communication, and technology is simply a vehicle. It doesn't have emotion. It's just there. It's like a bridge, and what you send across that bridge will determine whether or not there's a sense of communion and whether there's a connection. And the question is true. People can get content anywhere. So the question becomes, what is the publisher really providing? And this is where it comes back to story, because story is ultimately what makes the difference. And why is that so? Neuroscience teaches us that stories, especially powerful stories, are simulated personal experiences, meaning we're not physically in the story, but on a mental level, we are in the story. We feel connected to that. We connect with characters. We connect with plot lines. We connect with situations and scenarios. We connect with struggle. It's sort of a human drama unfolding when we look at stories. And when we look at Netflix and the rise of binge media culture and why it's outpaced movies in popularity, is they decided we're going to take that notion that we simulate personal experience or what stories are, and we are going to give it to you in a very condensed way that is going to accelerate your connection to the show, to the series, to the network, to the characters. I would argue that in binge culture versus the old-fashioned way of episodic television, we form stronger bonds with these characters because, when we binge, we kind of go through war with them to stay focused and keep up with it. So ultimately, the stories that your companies are telling and inviting that sense of connection, identity, and belonging in itself is a form of communion with your customers with that. Now, obviously, it's religion. From a liturgical standpoint, your companies are sending out or selling products and items that, can be found on the internet, can be found here, can be found there. But at the end of the day, the one thing that you have unique that no one else has is your brand story and your brand culture. And that's important. That counts for a lot because human beings don't make economic decisions based upon ration. They make it based upon emotion. And the stronger the emotional connection that they feel to your company and what it represents, the more powerful it's going to be in creating that communion between your customers and your products. And that's very important because it's often overlooked, especially for publishing companies. The only thing we know about publishing companies are it's somewhere their logo appears, whether it's in the inside fold of a publication or whatnot. Largely, publishing companies' job is to facilitate the product itself and kind of get out of its way. But I would argue you need to do exactly the opposite to be competitive in this age of technology. You need to look at the roots of your story. And I looked at some of the member sites and stories for where this organization coming into this. And typically it's relegated to about us. And if you kind of really want to know about it, that's how we started. But everything you do should be built around that story. Everything is an extension of that story. It's powerful, not just from a customer culture standpoint, to be able to form an attachment to the specific details about what this brand is about, but even more so, anyone who works for that brand. It helps you guide decision making. Your story is a business tool. It keeps you on track. It helps to guide you to what's next and to where you're going. And if you think about a story, what's important? Continuity. It's their story is a sense of struggle. It's a sense of journey. It's a sense of traveling toward a meaningful goal. And there's no place where this is more successfully executed and has been for some time than the Disney Corporation. If you want to understand and want to get a sense of what I'm talking about and how this can be put to work for you, look at everything that Disney does, because Walt Disney died, I believe, in 1967, and every single person who works for Disney still is still a tenet of that story. They're advancing that story every single day in terms of what they do, and it guides what they're doing. It guides their culture, it guides their brand, it guides everything that they're doing. So these are just some insights in rethinking your story, the role that it plays in your business culture, your strategy, because your brand is your culture and your culture is your brand. And your brand and your culture is rooted in your story and what you're doing. And if it's not, then yes, you are kind of a commodity and just doing the same thing that everyone else is doing. So you have to find the way to win customers with that. And I'll use an example. Some would consider this to be foreign. I think pizza is kind of a religion, not to be blasphemous and not to be insensitive, but I love pizza. And this is somewhere that I put it into effect. Anyone want to be in the restaurant business right now? It's kind of tough, but Little Pop's Pizzeria, which is one of my clients, their business is up 65% in these times. They're so busy they can't even handle the volume on most weekend nights. But this doubling of growth year over year began when we told their powerful story. I produced this documentary film about their backstory, and it's a great story. It's a family moved from New York with young children, high school education, worked his entire life to build a successful company. 20 years later, he sold it, went to work here in the Midwest in Naperville, my hometown, for the buyer. And their proceeds for the sale were going to be received over time. The buyer's company went bankrupt. They lost it all and tried to figure out how they're going to feed their family. Literally went through a time where members of their church were sending them gift cards to buy food for their kids. And long story short, they reached back into their family roots and opened up a pizzeria. They had no experience in the restaurant business. And their story, telling that story, they have great products, they have great food. But as we told that story, it formed an attachment between their customers that we'd never seen before. And instantaneously, every month, revenue started growing year over year. And the way that they have come to support Little Pops in this time is amazing. And I use that as an example that when people know who you are, they know your story, they're attached to it, they feel a connection to it, they feel an identity to it, they feel a sense of belonging in your brand. That's when you can begin to continue to do the great work that you're doing with all of your products and everything else that you're doing. So be vulnerable, be willing to let your customers know that you need their support. So With that, I'm going to close it up, and I just want to say a few words. Social Frequency is my company. Podcasts, that's another great big thing that you can use and do to augment your publishing business and to form that connection. That was the other thing I forgot to mention. But basically, Social Frequency, we do podcast production, multimedia production, story-driven brand strategy. I can guide you through this whole process as well. And the other, I'm also a partner in a startup called .org Freelancer for the nonprofit and association world. And basically, it is a matchmaking platform for freelancers in this space. It's something that was created because it needs to exist. It's slowly growing, as is the evolution of work. But myself and 4 other colleagues of mine decided we need to start building this infrastructure to make everything possible to bridge this divide. So .org Freelancer is a resource for the future of work here for organizations and freelancers to connect with each other on projects, opportunities, and skills. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Therese with 30 seconds left on my timer here, and see how we want to close this out.
Well, thank you, Stuart. I really enjoyed hearing the stories, especially knowing that where your background is, that it kind of matches nicely in so many ways with what our folks are doing. I just had a couple of last minute things for you folks to kind of respect time. I want to remind you that there will be a recording of this webinar, and it will be sent automatically to you. It will also be posted at the website. So if you're other people who are going to come to this and we're not able to, they can find it there. Our next webinar is going to be on innovations in print at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on June 2nd. You can register for that and the other webinars in the series at the website. Scroll down from the front page down to calendar, and you'll find all of them. And then the first peer group meeting will be on June 9th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. It's for the marketing group. There are successive ones on the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday that week, and then the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of the following week. These are just an initial dip in the pool for these groups. Hopefully, we will find some time to be able to schedule additional ones so that you can meet on a more regular basis rather than just waiting to see each other at conferences that aren't sure are actually going to take place in the coming year. So that's it. I don't see any questions. So in honoring the time that we have, if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, have a great day, everybody, and we hope to see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.